From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Ron DeSantis formally declares the start of his campaign for president, long awaited, and using the unconventional approach of Twitter, which broke down as it happened before the Florida governor could give his remarks for 20 minutes or so. But glitches aside, how formidable is the Florida governor's message, and what chances does he have of defeating Donald Trump? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot, editor of the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. I'm here with two of my colleagues, Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson, both DeSantis watchers, presidential campaign watchers. So the launch glitch was embarrassing in the sense that if you want to launch a presidential campaign, you'd prefer not to have it interrupted with a breakdown of what's supposed to be a new and innovative way to announce. And he lost some followers of people who dropped off the event. But my own view, Kim, is that this is not going to matter much to the race in the long term. Voters won't remember it much or care, though the press is fixated on it this morning. In the end, they'll care about what DeSantis says and how he presents himself as a candidate.
I agree with you. Look, the press is fixated on it because Twitter is the home to the press. And that was one question you might have asked about DeSantis' decision to use this as his forum for his launch. I can see the rationale in certain ways. It's unconventional, but it's in some ways a way to troll Donald Trump, given that he was so ubiquitous on that platform prior to getting kicked off of it. Maybe it shows that DeSantis is a modern guy in contrast to some of the older entrants into this race. The problem is that Twitter Spaces is notoriously unreliable. And obviously, the press was all going to pile on if anything went wrong, which it inevitably did. But I'm with you. I think this is immediately forgettable. It probably would have helped him to have had a smoother rollout in terms of maybe instant fundraising and donors. But in terms of the long haul and this campaign, what's going to matter more is what he says and what his message is.
All right, let's listen to his campaign pitch and what his themes are.
Truth must be our foundation, and common sense can no longer be an uncommon virtue. In Florida, we proved that it can be done. We chose facts over fear, education over indoctrination, law and order over rioting and disorder. We held the line when freedom hung in the balance. We showed that we can and must revitalize America. We need the courage to lead and the strength to win. I'm Ron DeSantis, and I'm running for president to lead our great American comeback.
All right, Kyle Peterson, common sense, normalcy, sanity, great American comeback. An implicit criticism there, both, I think, of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and basically saying we're going to restore kind of common sense leadership after the chaotic divisiveness of recent years. What do you make of the message?
I think it's a reasonable message for him out of the gate. I think people are going to want more details on what he means. I mean, every politician says everything that they want to do is common sense. But then I think Ron DeSantis pivots to the Florida record, and the motto might be Make America Florida Again. And he has a very long list of things, even just in this past legislative session, that he has passed that I think will be very attractive to Republican and conservative voters. And some of this stuff people have heard about, Disney and so forth, but some of it they maybe have not. Ensuring that state investments are based on maximizing returns, not on any sort of environmental or social criteria, changing the rules for public workers, most of them at least, so that they have to directly pay union dues if they're a member of a union, that the union can't take that out of their paychecks, crime, tort reform. I mean, the list goes on. And I think that is his strongest suit is saying, as he did in that Twitter Spaces interview and as he has before, there's a reason that Florida is number one in where other Americans are moving. And so I think that was a pretty decent message as a first 30,000-foot rollout, that the clip that was played. And then he will just have to take it to Iowans and explain what he really means by that.
Yeah, I mean, I would not make the theme Make America Like Florida, because I don't think you want to be that specific, saying we want to turn it into Florida. He has to broaden that message. But Florida success is clearly going to be a crucial part of his message, particularly contrasted with Trump, Kim, because what he's trying to say is, in part, look, I got things done. Trump, for all of his rhetorical flair, often got in his own way, often failed to deliver on what he promised. And you're beginning to see some of that criticism of Trump even appear now, saying, for example, that he didn't really secure the border, for example, and criticizing him for spending. And then I think the freedom message is implicitly also about COVID and how he handled COVID and opening the schools in 2020, for example, despite being sued by the teachers' unions. He won that lawsuit. Keeping the economy open, one of the first governors to reopen the economy after the early lockdowns. And in contrast to Trump, and I think you're going to hear who supported lockdowns much longer, and remember had that memorable fight with Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, who wanted to open up and Trump told him not to. I think you're going to hear an awful lot about that contrast. And you're going to hear an awful lot about Anthony Fauci, who Trump kept on the job right through the end of his term. And in fact, you'll hear Ron DeSantis say that Donald Trump even gave an award to Anthony Fauci. And in contrast, I dug into the data myself. I made the proper trade-offs between the risks of COVID and ill health and the larger costs of lockdowns and shutdowns and tried to strike a better balance.
That's right. The importance of all of those Florida reforms is not so much the individual ones, because often what governors do at a state level are not what you replicate, obviously, as president. The point of them, of highlighting them, is to show Ron DeSantis's leadership, his governance abilities, his ability to get things finished. And that was the message I very much heard, as not just in the Twitter spaces, but he did a number of other media interviews following it, more conventional on Fox. He did one with Mark Levin on radio, different print journalists. The message there, and if I would paraphrase, is Donald Trump made a lot of big promises. Many of them are great, many of which I agree with, but he was really awful when it came to executing them. Look at me. I'm the sort of person who can get that done. This is why I'm a winner, why I win re-election with 19 points, and instead why the Republican Party under Donald Trump's leadership is engaged in, and the words DeSantis uses specifically, is a culture of losing. So he's going to highlight not just COVID, and that's a very big one. I agree with you. But he's also going to talk about his leadership in other times of crisis, which obviously is the real test of governance. That would include, for instance, his management of the hurricanes in Florida. He got some pretty wild reviews for those. And remember that the election came just not long after that. I myself have long believed that part of the margin of his reelection victory was, in fact, a lot of Floridians who were simply grateful that there was a governor there who managed to get the state back up and running within days of a very devastating event. So this is going to be, I think, front and center of his complaints against Donald Trump, his attack on Donald Trump, that as well as striving very hard, and you see this in everything he does, to present as a kind of low drama figure, which is also designed to be a contrast to a president who attracts a lot of outside attention, and there seems to be drama surrounding Donald Trump with everything he does.
Let's listen to one of the clips with Trey Gowdy on the culture wars.
The woke mind virus is basically a form of cultural Marxism. At the end of the day, it's an attack on the truth. And because it's a war on truth, I think we have no choice but to wage a war on woke. So how does that work for a president? Some of it may be the bully pulpit, being willing to tell the truth and not being deluded by ideology, which we see in many aspects of our society.
Kyle, in many ways, that's vintage DeSantis. He's a brawler in the culture wars, and part of his selling point is, I won't back down. The left comes up with these ideas that want to change fundamentally American society. I will resist. I will fight back. That is part of his sales pitch. What do you think of it as a vote getter? Because Trump is a cultural brawler, too. Is that too much playing into Trump's strength, or does he have to do that to show comparable strength?
I think he needs to do some of that and pair it again, as Kim was talking about, with discussion of how he's the guy who actually knows where the levers of power are. and can execute them. I mean, in Florida, the state legislature signed by the governor has banned sort of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion offices in state institutions. And on this Twitter Spaces conversation, he said all these education institutions have to get accredited. And ultimately, some of that power flows up to the U.S. Department of Education. And so maybe there's something that a president, if he wanted to, could do to pull that accreditation lever and tamp down on this stuff and go back to old school principles of equality and treating everyone the same and judging people by the content of their character. And so I think that that was effective. I mean, I think he needs to be careful on this as well as in other subjects. I mean, the investigation into the vaccine makers that are happening in Florida is another example of not going too far where you're doing something that might be really popular among Republican primary voters and then pretty unpopular in a general election if he gets the nomination, giving President Biden the kind of ammunition to put a dent in his credibility in some of these swing states if we get to November 2024 with Ron DeSantis on the ticket.